The transport hub of Elyndra looked less like a spaceport and more like a city that had forgotten where it ended. Towering platforms floated in the air without visible support. Thousands of glowing transit lanes crossed above the streets like rivers of light. Cargo drones zipped between enormous crystal-covered buildings, while sleek starships descended from orbit through shimmering blue energy corridors. Ethan Mercer sat on a metal bench near Terminal 47, staring at a notification floating above his wrist communicator. Account balance, 12 credits. He stared at it for several seconds. Then he checked again. The number remained 12. "I think it's mocking me," he said. Across from him, his longtime friend Nolan burst out laughing. "The account? Yes? It can't mock you. It absolutely can. Look at the way it's displaying the number." Nolan leaned closer. "It looks completely normal." "That's exactly how it wants you to think." Nolan shook his head. "You've spent too much time repairing artificial intelligence systems." Ethan sighed dramatically and leaned back. 3 months earlier, he had arrived in Elyndra, hoping to find profitable engineering contracts. Instead, he had found delayed payments, broken equipment, impossible customers, and an apartment so small that he could open the refrigerator without leaving his bed. Life had not gone according to plan. Around them, thousands of travelers moved through the massive terminal. Humans, aliens, robots, synthetic citizens, merchants from distant star systems. The entire galaxy seemed to pass through Elyndra, and all of them appeared wealthier than Ethan. A nearby holographic advertisement suddenly appeared in the air. The image displayed Queen Lyra, the ruler of Elyndra. The woman was famous across dozens of star systems. She looked almost completely human, except for her long, elegant ears, which curved gracefully behind her silver hair. Her features were striking, calm, and impossibly refined. Behind her stood enormous orbital cities suspended above clouds. Nolan pointed toward the hologram. "You know," he said, "if you married her, your financial problems would probably disappear." Ethan immediately laughed. "Probably. Definitely. Good point." He stared thoughtfully at the Queen's image. Then he folded his arms. "You know what?" "What?" Ethan lowered his voice dramatically. "I need to marry the queen of this world." Nolan nearly choked. "What?" "I've solved everything." "You've solved nothing." "No, listen." Ethan stood and began pacing. "If I marry the queen, I won't need rent. That's not how marriage works. I won't need transportation. Still not how marriage works. I won't need engineering contracts. You definitely need those. I'll have a palace." Nolan laughed harder. "You can't just marry a queen because you're broke." "Why not?" "Because queens don't choose husbands based on financial desperation." Ethan raised a finger. "That's discrimination against poor people." Several nearby travelers started laughing after overhearing the conversation. Ethan bowed dramatically toward his accidental audience. "Thank you. I'll be performing all week." More laughter followed. For the first time that day, he felt genuinely relaxed. Then a calm female voice spoke directly behind him. "And what qualities would make you a suitable husband for the queen?" The laughter stopped instantly. Ethan smiled. Without turning around, he answered, "Oh, that's easy." He lifted another finger. "I'm charming." A second finger. "Reasonably intelligent." A third finger. "And I know how to repair air conditioning systems." The voice replied. An impressive combination. Something about the tone made the hairs on Ethan's neck rise. Slowly, very slowly, he turned around. His confidence vanished immediately. Standing behind him was the woman from the hologram, Queen Lyra. Several royal guards stood nearby, disguised as ordinary travelers. Though their expressions now suggested they regretted allowing this conversation to continue, the terminal suddenly felt much quieter. Ethan's brain stopped functioning completely. For several seconds, he simply stared. The queen observed him with curious golden eyes, not angry, not offended, curious, which somehow felt even more terrifying. Nolan quietly stood up. "I don't know him," he announced. Then he started walking away. "Ethan?" "What?" "Good luck." "You traitor." Nolan increased his walking speed. The Queen watched the exchange with visible amusement. Then, to Ethan's complete shock, a small smile appeared on her face. It was subtle, brief, but real. "I must admit," she said, "you are the first man who has ever proposed marriage to me because of air conditioning repair skills." The surrounding guards looked uncomfortable. The nearby travelers looked fascinated. Ethan wished the floor would open and launch him directly into space. Instead, he found himself standing face to face with the most powerful woman on the planet. And, for some reason, she looked far more interested than offended. Ethan expected prison. At the very least, he expected an extremely uncomfortable conversation with royal security. What he did not expect was a formal invitation to the palace. 3 hours after the incident at the transport terminal, a sleek black vehicle descended outside his apartment building. The vehicle alone was probably worth more than everything Ethan owned combined, which wasn't saying much. The apartment door slid open behind him. His landlord stepped into the hallway. The elderly woman stared at the royal vehicle. Then she stared at Ethan, then back at the vehicle. "Ethan, yes? What did you do? Honestly? Yes. I have no idea." The landlord crossed her arms. "If the Queen arrests you, can I rent your room to someone else?" Ethan blinked. "You move on fast. Business is business." 20 minutes later, he was seated inside the royal transport. The city flowed beneath him as the vehicle crossed the skyline. Massive floating gardens drifted between towers. Anti-gravity cargo platforms moved silently through the air. Orbital elevators stretched toward the stars like silver pillars. Ethan had lived on dozens of worlds. None looked quite like Elyndra. Unfortunately, the beauty did little to calm his nerves. A small service drone floated beside him. "Would you like refreshments?" "No." "Tea?" "No." "Nutrient beverage?" "No." "Psychological support?" Ethan looked up. "You offer that?" "Your stress indicators suggest severe emotional instability." "I appreciate the honesty." The drone hovered closer. "Would you like calming music?" "No." "Breathing exercises?" "No." "Emergency sedatives?" Ethan sighed. "Maybe." The drone immediately produced a small capsule. Finally, a reasonable customer. When the palace finally appeared, Ethan forgot about his anxiety for a moment. The structure was enormous. Parts of it floated above the main complex. Entire sections rotated slowly in the air. Energy shields shimmered around crystal towers that reflected sunlight like giant mirrors. It looked less like a palace and more like a civilization pretending to be a building. Inside, things became even stranger. Artificial intelligence servants moved through hallways. Walls displayed living holographic artwork. Transparent elevators traveled through open shafts filled with glowing particles. Everywhere Ethan looked, technology and elegance blended seamlessly. A royal attendant guided him through several corridors. "Her Majesty is waiting." Those words did absolutely nothing for his stress level. Eventually, they entered a circular chamber overlooking the city. Queen Lyra stood near a massive window. She wore a dark royal uniform, accented with silver lines that glowed faintly. Her long ears were visible through her silver hair. For a moment, she looked less like a queen and more like the captain of a starship. She turned toward him. "Engineer Ethan Mercer." Ethan immediately raised both hands. "Before we begin, I'd like to formally apologize for every word I said today." A small smile appeared on her face. "Which word specifically?" "All of them." Lyra laughed softly. To Ethan's surprise, it sounded genuine. "I did not summon you here for punishment." "That's wonderful. You seem relieved." "I had several prison scenarios prepared." "Several." 5. The Queen looked amused. "You planned 5 prison scenarios?" "I like being thorough." For the first time, Lyra openly smiled. Then her expression became more thoughtful. She touched a control panel beside her. The floor illuminated. Ancient symbols appeared around them. Above the symbols, countless stars materialized as a massive holographic projection. Ethan stared upward. "What is this?" "The Celestial Oracle." The stars shifted. Thousands of glowing pathways formed intricate patterns. The projection resembled a living galaxy. "Our ancestors built it centuries ago," Lyra said. "It analyzes probability across enormous periods of time." Ethan frowned. "A predictive quantum intelligence?" "Essentially." "That's impossible." So our scientists said. The stars suddenly rearranged themselves. A single golden line appeared, then another, and another. The pattern slowly merged into the outline of a humanoid figure. Ethan stared. The shape was strangely familiar. Too familiar. The figure wore a jacket remarkably similar to his. He stepped closer. Wait. The Queen nodded. Exactly. A chill ran through him. This is a coincidence. Perhaps. An incredibly weird coincidence. Perhaps. I prefer that explanation. The stars continued moving overhead. At the edge of the projection appeared ancient symbols. Some sections were damaged. Others had been erased entirely. Ethan noticed immediately. Someone had tampered with the data. The engineer inside him couldn't ignore it. Who deleted those sections? The Queen looked surprised. You noticed that quickly. I'm an engineer. Most historians missed it. Ethan stepped closer to the projection. The missing areas bothered him. The gaps looked intentional, precise, not random corruption. Someone had removed information. And suddenly, for the first time since arriving at the palace, his nervousness faded. Curiosity replaced it. The Queen noticed. So you're interested? Ethan folded his arms. That's the problem. What is? I came here expecting prison. And? Now I want to know who broke your ancient galaxy-predicting supercomputer. For a brief moment, Lyra laughed again, and neither of them realized that somewhere deep within the palace archives, hidden records connected to the prophecy had already begun attracting dangerous attention. The following morning, Ethan woke up inside a guest suite that was larger than his entire apartment building. For several seconds, he simply lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The ceiling displayed a realistic holographic night sky. 3 moons drifted overhead. A meteor shower crossed the room. One meteor suddenly changed direction. Ethan sat upright. That one looked suspicious. A cheerful voice immediately answered. That meteor was part of the decorative program. Ethan nearly jumped out of bed. A floating spherical assistant drone emerged from behind a wall. You should knock. I do not possess hands. Fair point. The drone rotated proudly. My designation is Assistant Unit 7. I'm calling you 7. Acceptable. 7 projected a schedule into the air. Ethan looked at it, then looked again, then a third time. This can't be right. It is. It says I have breakfast with the Queen. Correct. Then a meeting with royal historians. Correct. Then a tour of the palace archives. Correct. Then dinner with the Queen. Correct. Ethan pointed at the schedule. Are you absolutely certain I'm not accidentally becoming royalty? Current probability, 8%. 8%? 7 paused. 9%. Ethan groaned. An hour later, he was walking beside Queen Lyra through one of the palace's elevated gardens. The garden floated nearly 300 meters above the city. Anti-gravity, generators, hidden beneath crystal platforms, kept everything suspended in the air. Below them, flying vehicles crossed between towers. Above them, orbital stations glittered in the upper atmosphere. The view was breathtaking. Lyra appeared completely accustomed to it. Ethan was not. If I lived here, he said, I'd spend every day staring over the edge. Why? To remind myself that gravity hasn't won yet. The Queen laughed softly. Ethan was beginning to notice something. Lyra laughed far more than people seemed to expect. Most citizens viewed her as a distant ruler, but when she wasn't surrounded by ceremonies and politicians, she felt surprisingly normal. Well, normal for a queen who ruled an entire planet. Their walk eventually ended inside the Royal Archive Complex. The structure extended deep beneath the palace. Ancient knowledge, scientific records, historical documents, and technological research spanning thousands of years were stored there. Massive data pillars rose toward the ceiling. Billions of holographic records floated within transparent columns. Autonomous archivist robots moved silently between them. Ethan stared in amazement. This is beautiful. A nearby historian looked offended. Most visitors call it impressive. I'm an engineer. Your point? This is engineering. The historian sighed dramatically. I already dislike him. Lyra smiled. Most people need longer. They spent hours examining records connected to the celestial oracle. The more Ethan studied the prophecy, the stranger it became. References to an outsider appeared repeatedly, not just once, not twice, hundreds of times, across centuries, across entirely different historical periods. It made no sense. Eventually, Ethan stopped beside one particular record. His expression changed. Wait, Lyra looked over. What is it? This document references Archive Vault 19. So? Ethan pointed. The record exists. Yes. But the vault doesn't. The Queen frowned. What do you mean, I checked the palace schematics this morning. The room became silent. Ethan zoomed the file larger. According to this document, Vault 19 stored classified prophecy records 200 years ago. Go on. According to your current architectural plans, Vault 19 never existed. The historian nearby suddenly looked nervous. Very nervous. Ethan immediately noticed. So did Lyra. The Queen's golden eyes narrowed slightly. Historian Varric. The man swallowed. Your Majesty? Why are you nervous? No reason. You are sweating. It is warm. It is 21 degrees. The historian appeared to consider several lies before abandoning them. Ethan exchanged a glance with Lyra. Something was wrong. Before anyone could continue, alarms suddenly flashed across several archive terminals. Red light flooded the chamber. Archivists jumped to their feet. Data streams flickered. A security officer rushed into the room. Your Majesty, what happened? Someone attempted to access sealed Oracle records. The room froze. Lyra stepped forward immediately. From where? The officer looked down at his scanner. His face paled. The request originated inside the palace. Silence followed. Not the comfortable kind, the dangerous kind. Someone within the royal palace was searching for the same hidden records they were investigating. Ethan looked toward the frightened historian. The historian immediately looked away. That wasn't suspicious at all. Not even a little. Seven floated beside Ethan. In a very quiet voice, the drone whispered, I believe humans refer to this situation as a giant problem. Ethan folded his arms. That's one way to describe it. What is the other way? Ethan watched the nervous historian across the room. Then he smiled slightly. A mystery, and for the first time since arriving on Elyndra, he began to suspect that the prophecy was only the smallest part of something much larger hidden beneath the kingdom's perfect surface. The attempted intrusion into the Oracle records transformed the atmosphere inside the palace overnight. Until then, Ethan had viewed the prophecy as a fascinating puzzle. Now it felt like someone was actively trying to hide pieces of it, which meant the mystery was becoming far more interesting and significantly more dangerous. The following morning, Ethan found himself standing inside a secure research chamber deep beneath the palace. A three-dimensional model of the royal archives floated above a circular table. Thousands of glowing corridors and chambers rotated slowly in the air. Queen Lyra stood beside him, while a team of engineers searched for traces of the unauthorized access. The signal originated here, one technician said. A red marker appeared within the hologram. Ethan leaned closer. His eyes narrowed. That can't be right. The technician blinked. What do you mean? The signal path is impossible. Several scientists turned toward him. Ethan pointed at the display. If someone accessed the records from that location, the transmission would have crossed 3 security layers. Correct. It would also have crossed a sealed quantum firewall. Correct. And then somehow passed through a maintenance tunnel that hasn't existed for 80 years. The room became quiet. One engineer frowned. How did you notice that? Ethan shrugged. I spent years repairing government systems. The engineer looked horrified. I'm sorry. Thank you. Even Lyra smiled. The technicians quickly rechecked the data. Within minutes, their expressions changed. Ethan was right. The access route was fake. Someone had deliberately created false evidence. Someone intelligent, someone with access to palace systems, and someone who clearly did not want to be found. Several hours later, Ethan and Lyra traveled to another section of the capital. Their destination sat beneath the city itself, a forgotten archive complex built centuries earlier. According to recovered records, it had once been connected to Vault 19, the vault that supposedly never existed. A military transport carried them through underground transit tunnels, illuminated by streams of blue energy. Outside the windows, maintenance drones crawled along walls larger than skyscrapers. Ethan watched everything with fascination. I love this planet. Lyra glanced at him. Even while people may be plotting against you? Especially then. She laughed. Why? Because boring planets don't create secret archives. Your standards are unusual. I've been told that. The transport eventually reached a massive sealed chamber. Ancient alloy doors towered before them. Dust-covered symbols that predated modern Elyndra. The symbols resembled the markings surrounding the celestial oracle. Ethan felt a strange chill. History seemed to linger inside the metal itself. Security teams forced the ancient doors open. A deep vibration echoed through the structure. Then darkness greeted them. Lights activated automatically as they entered. Rows upon rows of forgotten data columns stretched into the distance. The archive was enormous, far larger than anyone expected. Even Lyra appeared stunned. This place was erased from history. Ethan slowly walked forward. Then somebody worked very hard to keep it hidden. They spent hours exploring. Most of the records were damaged. Others had been deliberately deleted. But eventually, they found something. A preserved projection chamber. Unlike modern systems, this one still used crystalline memory storage. Ancient, durable, difficult to alter. The projection activated. Stars filled the room. A familiar sight. The same celestial patterns used by the oracle. Then a voice emerged, calm, ancient, artificial. The outsider shall not rule through conquest. Everyone froze. The recording continued. The outsider shall not inherit the throne through blood. New star patterns appeared. Ethan stared silently. The outsider shall unite what division cannot. The stars shifted again. Entire civilizations appeared. Different species, different worlds, working together. Then the message ended. Silence settled over the chamber. The prophecy was not describing a conqueror. It was describing a bridge, a person capable of bringing others together. Lyra looked thoughtful. Ethan looked confused. Well, she asked. If that's about me, the oracle clearly skipped several personality evaluations. One of the soldiers laughed unexpectedly. Another followed. Soon even Lyra was smiling. The tension eased for a moment, but only briefly, because at the far end of the chamber, one of the security officers suddenly called out, "Your Majesty?" Everyone turned. The officer stood beside a recently opened storage compartment. Inside lay several crystal memory cores, and one of them had been removed. Not centuries ago. Recently, very recently. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. Someone else had been here. Someone searching for the same answers. And whoever they were, they remained one step ahead. The discovery of the missing crystal memory core changed everything. Until now, Ethan and Queen Lyra had been chasing clues buried in ancient history. Now they knew someone, in the present, was actively involved. Someone with access, someone with resources, and someone who understood the prophecy well enough to fear it. 3 days later, the palace had become noticeably different. Security patrols increased. Encrypted communications filled government networks. Entire departments were quietly investigating one another. The atmosphere felt calm on the surface. Underneath, tension spread like cracks through glass. Ethan sat inside a palace cafeteria overlooking the city. He poked suspiciously at a glowing blue fruit on his plate. Seven hovered nearby. "It is perfectly safe. You said that about the purple soup. It was safe. It dissolved my spoon. The spoon was weak." Ethan sighed. The drone was impossible to argue with. Across the room, several palace officials stared at him. Not discreetly, not subtly, just stared. Ethan pointed toward them. "They're doing it again." "They are. Why?" Seven paused. "Current public networks contain approximately 4 million discussions about you." Ethan nearly dropped the fruit. 4 million? 4,312,821. Why would anyone discuss me? The drone processed for a moment. "You accidentally became famous." "How?" "You publicly announced your intention to marry the Queen." Ethan covered his face. "Right." Unfortunately, things became even worse later that afternoon. A political assembly had been scheduled inside the royal council chamber. Representatives from the most powerful noble houses attended. Several had already begun using fragments of the prophecy to support their own ambitions. Ethan wasn't supposed to participate. He was only observing. That had been the plan. The plan lasted 12 minutes. One elderly noble stood and addressed the chamber. The prophecy cannot be trusted. Another immediately disagreed. The prophecy has guided Elyndra for centuries. A third stood. The outsider should be removed from all investigations. Several voices joined at once. The debate rapidly became chaos. Ethan watched for several minutes. Then he leaned toward Lyra. Do they always behave like this? Yes. How does civilization survive? I often ask the same question. A laugh escaped her before she could stop it. Several council members immediately noticed. The Queen rarely laughed during official meetings. The room became even more awkward. Then one noble suddenly pointed toward Ethan. Human! Ethan immediately regretted making eye contact. What? What is your opinion? About what? The prophecy. The entire room looked at him, hundreds of eyes, waiting. Ethan slowly stood. I think everyone is missing the obvious problem. Silence followed. What problem? Someone asked. The prophecy isn't the dangerous part. The room became quieter. Ethan continued. Someone is hiding information. Now everyone was listening. Someone erased records. He pointed toward the council members. Someone stole a memory core. Another pause. Someone is terrified of whatever the complete prophecy actually says. No one interrupted him. Even the political rivals seemed uncomfortable because they knew he was right. The argument wasn't about the prophecy anymore. It was about whoever had altered it. That realization spread through the chamber like a shockwave. Later that evening, Ethan and Lyra reviewed newly recovered data from the hidden archive. The final fragments required hours to decrypt. Ancient algorithms protected them. Quantum locks resisted modern computers. Eventually, a breakthrough appeared. The projection activated. Stars filled the room once more. Then new information emerged. Neither of them spoke. The prophecy had never promised victory. It had never guaranteed prosperity. It had never claimed the future was safe. Instead, it revealed something far more alarming. A crisis. A catastrophic failure connected to Elyndra's planetary quantum infrastructure. The systems controlling transportation, energy distribution, climate regulation, orbital synchronization. Everything. The prediction showed instability spreading across the entire world. Entire networks collapsing. Cities isolated. Millions affected. Ethan stared silently. So that's what they hid. Lyra nodded slowly. Someone had removed these records intentionally, not because the outsider was important, because the crisis was. The room fell silent. The Queen looked toward the city beyond the palace windows. For the first time, Ethan saw genuine concern in her eyes, not fear for herself. Fear for her people. And strangely, that was the moment he understood why so many citizens respected her. Then another line appeared within the projection, a final message preserved for centuries. The outsider identifies the path. The people create it. Ethan read it twice, then a third time. Finally, he sighed. Good. Lyra blinked. Good? At least it doesn't say I have to save the entire planet alone. To his relief, the Queen laughed. The tension eased for a brief moment. But deep inside the palace network, hidden far from both of them, an unknown observer watched the same prophecy files. And for the first time in centuries, that observer realized the truth had finally been uncovered. The crisis began 11 days later, not with explosions, not with alarms, not with war. It began with a train arriving 3 seconds late. Normally, nobody would have noticed. On Elyndra, people noticed. The planet's transportation systems were coordinated by the quantum nexus, an enormous network linked to orbital satellites, planetary climate arrays, communication grids, and millions of autonomous systems. Everything operated with near-perfect precision. A 3-second delay was unusual. A second delay occurred an hour later. Then another. Then another. By evening, engineers across the planet were reporting synchronization errors. By midnight, emergency meetings were underway. The prophecy had begun. Ethan stood inside the Central Operations Center beneath the palace. Thousands of holographic screens floated above circular workstations. Scientists rushed between consoles. Artificial intelligences monitored data streams. Entire continents rotated slowly above a giant planetary display. The atmosphere felt tense, very tense. Seven floated beside Ethan. Current situation assessment. Bad, extremely bad. Thank you, Seven. You are welcome. Across the room, Queen Lyra was coordinating responses with regional governors. Even under pressure, she remained calm, focused, determined. Ethan admired that. Several leaders were already arguing. That part was less admirable. We should isolate the northern network. No, we should reroute energy first. That would collapse transportation. It would prevent orbital failure. The debate intensified. Ethan rubbed his forehead. They're doing it again. Seven rotated slightly. The arguing? Yes. Historical records indicate leaders enjoy arguing. I've noticed. A nearby scientist suddenly shouted, "We've found the source." The room fell silent. Everyone turned. A massive projection appeared above the center of the chamber. Data streams converged toward a single location. Not a city, not a facility, an orbital structure, far above the planet. Ethan recognized it immediately. The Oracle. Lyra's eyes narrowed. The celestial oracle rotated slowly within the projection. For centuries, the ancient machine had analyzed probabilities and future possibilities. Now it appeared connected to the instability spreading through the planet. An uneasy silence followed. Finally, Ethan spoke. I don't think the oracle is causing the problem. Several scientists looked at him. Why? Because whoever altered the prophecy records understood the oracle. He pointed toward the display. If they hid information about the crisis, they probably hid information about this too. The room became thoughtful. Lyra nodded. You believe someone tampered with the oracle itself? I think someone has been tampering with it for centuries. No one liked that answer, mostly because it sounded plausible. Within hours, a mission was assembled. A royal shuttle launched toward orbit, carrying Ethan, Lyra, security personnel, and a team of specialists. The enormous Oracle station gradually filled the viewport. Even after seeing it before, Ethan was stunned. The structure was colossal. Ancient metallic rings surrounded a luminous core. Energy fields shimmered around sections larger than entire cities. It looked less like a machine and more like an artificial moon. As they docked, warning indicators flashed across the station. System instability was spreading, faster now. The moment they entered, they found evidence that confirmed Ethan's fears. Someone had been there recently. Access panels had been opened, security logs erased, several core systems modified. Not years ago, not decades ago, recently, very recently, they moved deeper into the structure. The Oracle's interior felt alive. Streams of light flowed through transparent conduits. Quantum processors extended beyond sight. Artificial stars flickered inside energy chambers. The technology was far beyond anything Ethan had encountered. Eventually, they reached the central nexus chamber. A vast sphere of rotating light hovered above an abyss. Data cascaded around it like waterfalls made of stars. And standing before it was a single figure, an elderly man, historian Varric, the nervous archivist. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then Ethan sighed. Honestly, I expected someone taller. The guards nearly laughed despite the situation. Varric slowly turned. His expression carried exhaustion rather than malice. I never wanted this. Lyra stepped forward. Then why hide the truth? Varric looked toward the oracle. Because the complete prophecy terrified those who came before us. His voice echoed through the chamber. They believed the crisis would create panic. And now? Lyra asked. Now it is happening. The oracle suddenly pulsed, violently. Warning lights exploded across the chamber. The entire station trembled. Systems throughout the planet began failing one after another. The countdown had begun. And, for the first time, everyone understood that the future the prophecy described was no longer approaching. It had arrived. Warning lights flooded the oracle's core chamber. The ancient machine pulsed like a living star. Across the planet, transportation systems were failing. Communication networks flickered. Climate regulators drifted out of synchronization. The crisis hidden for centuries had finally arrived. Yet historian Varric did not run. He stood beside the glowing sphere and looked at Queen Lyra with tired eyes. The prophecy was misunderstood from the beginning, he said quietly. The outsider was never meant to save Elyndra. Ethan frowned. That's encouraging. Varric actually smiled. The outsider was meant to unite Elyndra. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Ethan looked around the chamber, at the scientists, the soldiers, the royal advisors, even Varric himself. Suddenly he understood. The prophecy's final message echoed through his mind. The outsider identifies the path. The people create it. The oracle wasn't waiting for a hero. It was waiting for cooperation. For centuries, leaders had focused on finding one special individual. They'd ignored the second half of the prophecy, the important half. Ethan stepped toward the central console. Can we connect every major network on the planet? The chief engineer blinked. Technically. Can we connect every scientific institution? Yes. Regional governments? Yes. Orbital facilities? Yes. The engineer hesitated. Why? Ethan smiled. Because we're done looking for one person to solve this. Within minutes, emergency transmissions spread across Elyndra. Scientists shared research, engineers shared solutions, governors coordinated resources, military fleets protected infrastructure instead of guarding political interests. Rival factions began working together. For the first time in generations, the entire planet moved toward a single goal. And slowly, the failing systems stabilized. The solution itself was surprisingly simple. Thousands of disconnected subsystems needed synchronized recalibration. No single expert possessed every answer. Together, they did. For 18 exhausting hours, the world worked as one. When the final adjustment completed, the oracle's violent pulses gradually slowed. The warning lights disappeared. The giant sphere of light returned to a calm glow. Silence filled the chamber. Then the central display changed. Ancient symbols appeared. A final message, hidden for centuries, emerged. The future is never predicted. It is chosen. Nobody spoke. Even the oracle had been trying to teach the same lesson all along. Weeks later, Elyndra looked different. Not physically, politically, socially. The secret records were released to the public. The truth about the prophecy became known. Historian Varric accepted responsibility for hiding information, but was also recognized for preserving the records from those who wanted them destroyed completely. The noble houses abandoned their struggle to control the prophecy. Without a mystery to manipulate, most of their arguments lost power. Ethan considered that the greatest miracle of all. One evening, he stood beside Queen Lyra on a floating balcony overlooking the capital. Thousands of lights stretched across the horizon. Air traffic moved peacefully between glowing towers. The planet was alive, thriving. Lyra leaned against the railing. When I first heard you at the transport terminal, I assumed you were foolish. Ethan nodded. That was a reasonable conclusion. She laughed. And now. She looked directly at him. Now I know you were only pretending. For a moment, neither spoke. The wind moved through her silver hair. The long ears that marked her species caught the golden light of sunset. Ethan smiled. When I arrived here, I was worried about rent. You mentioned that. Frequently. Very frequently. He laughed. I thought marrying the queen would solve my problems. And did it? Ethan considered the question carefully. Then, he looked toward the city they had helped save. It solved some. Lyra raised an eyebrow. Only some? It created several new ones. The queen laughed so hard she nearly lost her royal composure. For the first time, Ethan didn't see a ruler. He saw a friend, someone he trusted completely, someone he had come to care about far more than he expected. Finally, Lyra extended her hand, the same simple gesture that had once been predicted by ancient machines and misunderstood by generations. Ethan took it, not because of a prophecy, not because of destiny, but because it felt right. Far above them, the oracle continued watching the stars, not predicting the future, simply observing countless possibilities waiting to be chosen. And, on the world of Elyndra, a human who had arrived with empty pockets and a careless joke, began a new chapter of his life beside a queen who had once been standing quietly behind him when everything started.